Building an Accessible Recruiting Event. This webinar, in collaboration with Indeed and Making Space, features speakers Noah Porten and Keely Wells from Making Space, Amy Wood from Salesforce, and Andrea Lessard from Red Bull. Disclaimer. Due to a technical issue, the recording captured only one panelist during the webinar. However, the full conversation and audio from all speakers are included in this recording. We've added speaker labels and visuals to make it easier to follow the discussion.
Hey everyone, welcome to Building an Accessible Recruiting Event, Indeed and Making Space's second workshop in our six-part workshop series on attracting disabled talent. I will just introduce myself and our organizations before we get started. My name is Noah Porten. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with long brown curly hair. I'm wearing a red turtleneck sweater and a black leather blazer. And I am a marketing strategist at Making Space. I've co-led our in-person Disability Pride Month event and our National Disability Employment Awareness event, along with several other virtual events. And I am here today moderating in place of our wonderful partner at Indeed, Donna Bungard, the Director of Accessibility at Indeed, who was unfortunately unable to be with us today. But very excited to have her at our future workshops. So a little intro on Making Space and Indeed for those who are new. Making Space is a talent acquisition platform and advisory partner, helping organizations hire, develop, and retain disabled talent. And Indeed is a job site platform committed to disability inclusion through skills-first hiring, event hosting, and more, from ensuring that every main stage has a ramp or a lift to standardizing the access to water bowls for service animals. Indeed works to make space for disabled talent because they know that disability isn't an edge case, it's normal and it's already in every room. So let's get into it. I'm excited to introduce our guest speakers for today. So we have Andrea Lessard, the VP of Talent Acquisition at Red Bull. We have Amy Wood, who is the Manager of Accessible Events and Real Estate / Travel at Salesforce. And of course, we have our leader, Keely Wells, who is our CEO at Making Space and founder. So I will pass the mic to each of you to do a brief introduction and visual description and what connects you to today's topic of planning accessible recruiting events. I'll pass it over to you, Keely, first.
Awesome, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Keely Wells, pronouns are she, her. Brief visual description, I'm a white woman with long blonde hair wearing a black shirt that actually says be kind and have a blue background that says Making Space and Indeed. And as Noah mentioned, CEO, founder of Making Space. I acquired a disability when I was 17, which completely changed my life. And I moved to the US, and after losing a job due to disability discrimination, founded my first company, which focused on increasing access for disabled creatives. And after selling that business, founded Making Space a few years ago to really tackle the unemployment crisis of disabled people much more broadly and help companies create more accessible spaces that just work better for everyone. And thrilled to be a part of this conversation, and I will hand it to Amy.
Thank you so much, Keely, and thank you everyone for having me today. I'm Amy Wood, and I am an accessibility manager at Salesforce in the Office of Accessibility. And as the accessibility manager, I lead programs at Salesforce that are focused on driving accessibility across our events, real estate, and transportation. We really want to make sure that all of our attendees, customers, and visitors have inclusive experiences when they're visiting on site or attending any of our events or when they're traveling for work. And right now I have blonde, wavy hair with a little bit of gray, and I'm wearing a maroon turtleneck dress with gold jewelry. I've got my special evil eye necklace, which is supposed to be good luck. And then what connects me today to this event is my experience with accessibility in events. And I have been deaf since I was 5 months old. I lost all of my hearing due to spinal meningitis. And I was born into a hearing family, and I was also mainstreamed in school, so I didn't really have access to a lot of the tools growing up, such as the deaf school, the sign language. So I'm really passionate about making sure that we are meeting people where they are in terms of their disability or medical condition. So thank you so much for having me today. And I'm going to pass it over to Andrea.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrea, and I am in black, which is my usual uniform. My hair is slicked back into a bun because I was too lazy to dry it. And it's also a bit salt and peppery. So I also look 21, which is surprising to have the gray hair, I know. All jokes aside, I'm really happy to be here. I would say that, for me, what really connects me to the cause and to continue to search and work towards sort of the ultimate goal of having the most accessible workplace and practices sort of developed over time, and more specifically as it relates to my connection with the Wings for Life charity. And that is a foundation that is specifically was founded and only there to find a cure for spinal cord injuries. And so my connection with that foundation has led me to use my role, not only currently, but also in the past, to create accessibility, more accessibility for an untapped workforce. So yeah, I'm excited to be here today and answer any questions.
Amazing. So we'll get into the questions. I do just want to note, forgot to mention that we do have captions at the bottom and also transcripts available. And the panel and Q&A will be recorded and sent out afterwards. We also have our lovely ASL interpreter who's pinned here. So diving right in. Um, Keely, I'm wondering if you can share, just to kick us off, some of the barriers that you see our disabled talent at Making Space and in general facing to attending networking events.
Yeah, great question. There are so many barriers that I could list. I will start with maybe one that affects me personally. I've experienced going to events and just not having just simple access to seating. For me, if I am standing for a long period of time, all I can think about is needing to sit or being in pain, and I'm not able to focus on the conversation at hand or be able to be my best self in that situation. So just having adequate seating is such a simple but powerful tool to create more access. Other barriers that we've seen job seekers at Making Space experience is a lack of captions or ASL interpretation or sign language interpretation, depending on where they're based, which is a big barrier for a lot of deaf and hard of hearing folks. We've seen paper worksheets that have been distributed, which are not also available online, creating barriers for those who use screen readers, for example, or those who are low vision and may need the magnifier tool on their phone or computer. We've also seen activities that lack structure or clear instructions, which I think are a big barrier for neurodivergent folks, among others. And then we've also seen indoor only and in-person only events, which can be a really big barrier for those who are immunocompromised, or who can't also access transportation to be able to get to those events as well. Um, and then I think there are also barriers that we can talk about even prior to the event, the way that they're marketed, maybe they're not accessible, maybe they're not being distributed or directly targeted to the community. And also maybe they don't have information about the accessibility of the event right up front, which can be really intimidating for folks because as a disabled job seeker, you may not want to disclose your disability at that point in time. You may be a bit nervous asking for access requirements or accommodations. So I think a great solution for recruiters and for recruiting events is just to be really upfront and transparent about what is available right away, and also a direct contact for someone to reach out to if they do want to and need to ask for access requirements.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Keely. And I kind of wanted to talk about some of the ways that, you as talent acquisition professionals can kind of remove some of those barriers for disabled talent. And I'll kind of talk about some of the things that we've done at Making Space for our events that we've had success with. And I want to start by kind of talking about the common misconception about accessibility, which is that it's expensive. But an Ask Jan survey found that majority of employers report that workplace accommodations cost nothing. And I think that that translates to events as well, especially when accessibility is planned for in advance versus reactive. So like I think Keely mentioned, kind of having access information up front and starting with just a question on your sign up form. Do you have any access requirements? Doesn't require anyone to disclose. It's asked to everybody. And that way you already know, okay, what people need and you can plan for that in advance. Um, so that's usually where we start. And then we look at kind of three accessibility pillars. So ensuring that people can enter the physical or virtual room and move freely once they're there, ensuring that people can participate once they're in the room, and then that people can communicate with each other. And so Keely kind of mentioned some of the barriers in within each pillar. So I'm going to kind of talk about how to address those. But so in terms of getting into the room and moving freely, when we're talking about a physical room, usually we think about a wheelchair accessible venue. But when we think about a wheelchair accessible venue, people also have to get there. So also wheelchair accessible parking, that there's a path from the parking to the venue, and also, of course, bathrooms. And then, like Keely mentioned, there's lots of folks who need to sit but don't use mobility aids. And when you're like in a room with a lot of people networking, people are often standing in groups and the chairs are out on the side. So you're kind of sidelined from the conversation. So kind of thinking about a way to set up the chairs so that they are part of the conversation, but also so that they're not blocking a path for people who are using guide dogs or mobility aids. So we found kind of round tables to work well for that with a path in between, and chairs around. So that's kind of making sure people can get into the room and then making sure people can participate, like Keely mentioned, sending in advance PDF versions of any documents they're going to have at the event so people can use, who are blind or low vision, can use screen readers. If it's an in-person event, maybe having some outdoor space or having some masks available for immune compromised folks. And then one thing for virtual events as well is providing different ways to engage and ask questions. So I want to share a story of a sender that a job seeker that we had in our community, who went to an in-person recruiter or a virtual recruiter-led Q&A. And the questions were answered and handled verbally only. So by the time she processed her question, they had already moved on to another question. And so she felt really overwhelmed and belittled, even though she was super prepared. And obviously didn't leave like a great impression of the employer to her. And it was just because the format didn't leave room for different processing styles. So if you're doing a virtual event, thinking about maybe leaving room for people to ask questions in advance or put them in the chat, things like that. And then communication, like Keely mentioned, having captions, ASL interpretation, things like that. So those are some things we think about with removing those barriers. And I want to ask Andrea, what are some of the challenges that you think talent acquisition professionals might be facing to implementing some of the things that I just mentioned to make a space more accessible?
I would say there are not very many challenges once you educate yourself. So I think that you've listed a lot of the things that there's misconceptions, right? It's expensive, or we just can't, or it's not embedded in our recruitment marketing strategies or our recruiting strategies. I would say in the past, what I found is that if you're participating in an event and you're not the owner of the event, it's not something that you have created or customized. Now you're sort of needing to influence whoever is putting on the event. Who do they have a contract with? If it's indoors and it's at a hotel, typically they're going to be very understanding and accommodating and be able to adjust because that is what they are used to doing. Conference centers, I would assume, I would put them up just about the same. Um, but if you're having something that is online and you own it, then really, if you don't have the education or the information or the expertise, you attend something like this, you learn lots of good information, you make your checklist, and now with everything that you have available to you through some sort of chat GPT or AI tool, research, you can research almost anything, and you'll find that most of these things are not cost prohibitive. They're very thoughtful and they can be done in advance. So having a sign up or an RSVP in advance, especially in my experience, if you're doing something that's a bit more customized, uh, I've done special private events for engineers. I've done blue collar events in large um, conference rooms or conference space. So I think that the more that you are in control, the easier. But I would say that having the expertise, understanding the sort of impediments or the accessibility needs, sending something out in advance and saying, do you have any accessibility requirements is 99%, I would say, of what you need to do to prepare. Otherwise, do your research, talk to the facility or talk to the event sponsor and make sure that they understand that these are your requirements for attending or participating in the event. And sometimes maybe if you get a little bit of pushback or we're not sure, as long as you are educated, then you could say, oh, okay, well, these are the things that I'd like to request. Here's my checklist. Do you think this is reasonable? So you just a little bit of influence. I really don't think there's a lot that you can't overcome, right? You can't cover every single topic, but I really just don't think that you wouldn't be able to, if you put your mind to it, easily make those adjustments so that it's an effective event.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about kind of like, especially if you're working with like a hotel or a conference center, like they're used to, all sorts of requirements and adjustments because, everybody has requirements that they need to be able to, come to an event and feel comfortable and be able to participate. And so it's not special or unusual. And event spaces, are used to that. So, Amy, I'm wondering, as an event accessibility expert, something that we hear often from talent acquisition professionals is that they really want to implement accessibility initiatives. They're excited about it, but they're concerned that they don't have the budget to implement it. So, what advice would you give them, and how would you recommend kind of planning for accessibility if you have a limited budget?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite topics, and least favorite topics is budget, who's paying for it, and who's responsible for that. And I do just want to touch on what Andrea said. She's absolutely right. There is no challenge that you can't overcome, but I'm sure that she would agree that progress is not overnight. Sometimes it will take a little while. You will have to experience barriers, and then you can go after the fact and say, this is what this person experienced, and here's a solution going forward. So it took us 4 years to get captioning on the main screen at Dreamforce, which is our largest event. And once we did it, it was amazing, and we were able to get captions in all 97 rooms. So that was a really great point that Andrea made of like, there's really nothing you can't overcome. And so as far as budgeting, and this is a really great way to look at it, I'm going to break it up into three different categories, which is zero cost, low cost, and then specialized accommodations. And so first we can talk about selecting an accessible venue first. Most venues in the United States are ADA compliant, meaning they are compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, but you can do a walkthrough of the space or a tour of the space and make sure that it is actually compliant with ramps, elevators, wide doorways, and it makes it much easier to look for a venue and rent that as opposed to having to rent temporary ramps or lifts later. And by the way, if you're doing a call for proposal from venue, you can ask on there is, are you accessible, or how do people with disabilities navigate your venue? And ask them to be specific. Don't just let them say we're compliant with local federations. Say specifically, how can someone who is blind navigate the venue? And someone had mentioned on this call about the outside of the venue as well. That is equally important. We've had many venues that were ADA compliant, but the outside was torn up from construction. So anyone using a mobility device couldn't even get inside. So it's just kind of taking a larger look at the venue, not just the venue itself, but surrounding areas. And then Keely had mentioned the candidate experience. It starts at the invitation. If your registration page isn't accessible, then you've already filtered out talent. So making sure that your job descriptions are accessible and they're screen reader friendly. You're not using flattened PDFs. PDF can be very inaccessible to people using screen readers or using the keyboard to navigate. And then if you're having an event, ask the question, do you need an accommodation related to a disability? This allows you to plan exactly what they're needed. You take the guessing game out of it for you. You don't have to try to guess what somebody might need. I mentioned that I don't know sign language, and I've had many people reserve a sign language interpreter for me for an event. So that was time and money that they wasted on something that I can't even use. So And for Dreamforce, our largest event, we have 40,000 people, and we ask every single person, what accommodation do you need? And not all 40,000 people request an accommodation. I think we got about 350 accommodation requests last year, and we got most of them. I think we got like 99% of them that we were able to accommodate. Plain language, making sure all of your event communications are clear, non-technical language with high contrast design. These are all no cost. I'm still on that topic. And then talking about staff training, make sure that all of your staff are trained on disability etiquette, ask before assisting, eye contact, offer seats, and make sure that you have chairs nearby for candidates that can't stand for long periods of time. The room setup that you have and the physical logistics go a long way, making sure that your aisles have 36 inches so that people using wheelchairs can navigate through the room. Making sure that your food and beverage is at a comfortable height. Typically, I think it's like 28 to 34 inches so that someone can reach across the table and grab food or grab a pamphlet or anything that's on a table. I'm going to go into low-cost physical accommodations. If you're using high-top cocktail table, make sure that you have some at a standard sitting height so that someone using a wheelchair can just roll right up and then sit with other people and have a conversation or network with their peers. High contrast signage. Make sure that your wayfinding is good. If they can't find where they're going, it's going to be really overwhelming and really frustrating. So high contrast signage using plain, bold text. And then there's a pro tip that if you want to use a QR code to every physical sign, that can link to a digital version of the flyer or a map where a screen reader can announce that. Quiet zones. You can designate a small side room as a sensory break room. These places can be loud, they can be overwhelming, or maybe someone's nervous trying to network with somebody. And so they just need a minute to decompress and just take a break. And also candidate buffer zone. That's a really important one. These events can be loud. So if you designate a low sensory zone where candidates can network with people in a quieter space, that would make it a lot easier for people. So there's so much more. I promise you that Google is your best friend. If you can go in and type how to make a recruiting event accessible, or how to do no cost, and you can find checklists, you can find articles. It is really amazing. And so lastly, I'm just going to say the high impact needs that you have, ASL interpreters and captioning. If you do all of the stuff that I talked about earlier with the no cost, low cost, you can dedicate the resources and budget that you do have towards these high impact needs, sign language interpreters and captioning. And then digital accessibility, you could use free tools to ensure that your event website is screen reader friendly. But you can also hire people to review these for you. And then not only will they review your website, but they'll flag any barriers and then provide solutions to you. So there's so much more. I could go on forever, but I'll just stop it there because I think we're almost at time, so I don't want to take up any more time.
Yeah, those are all super great things. And, like you said, there's a lot of ways to just get started that are, that don't require any budget at all. They just require some education and planning. But there are some things that do require a budget. And, when it comes to requesting budget, often, our higher ups want to see some metrics of success and see how, number one, that accessibility implemented is successful, and also like how can we tie accessibility back to attracting quality talents and building up a strong pipeline. And at Making Space, we think those two things are super super tied together. So I'm curious, Keely, because accessibility isn't often a metric that is considered when measuring the success of a recruiting event, what are some practical steps to begin measuring accessibility of a recruiting event and the impact that increased accessibility has on an employer's talent pipeline?
Yeah, it's a great question. And before jumping into that, I might actually just piggyback off something that Amy mentioned as well. I think it's really important too for employers to recognize disability is not niche. It's the largest minority group in the world. Over 1 in 4 adults identify as disabled. 1.3 billion people globally live with a disability. And that doesn't account for those who are undiagnosed, who may choose not to disclose. So it probably is many, many more people. But many events, I think, often design for 1 or 2 people who will come to the event who are going to be disabled, but may not necessarily design for scale. And I think we need to shift that that kind of mindset too around designing for one or two, but actually designing en masse for a large population of disabled people. Because we've come across this a bunch at events where there's one or two parking spaces for wheelchair users, but what if 10 wheelchair users show up to the event? Then you're a little bit stuck, and we've definitely seen that before as well. But when it comes to measuring success, I think it's so important that we collect data and have as much feedback and information as possible to continuously innovate and iterate and design the most accessible spaces, and also continuously showcase to leaders and stakeholders that it's also working, and it's important to continuously double down on disability inclusion at events and beyond. And I think a great way to do that is to always just make it a success metric that one tracks. I'm sure that there are success metrics that are already being tracked at these events. Just add accessibility and disability as an additional metric that's going to be tracked. And also ensure that all feedback forms and feedback loops are also accessible. One simple thing that we've done with organizations in the past is adding an option for individuals to send in their feedback in video format. So, for example, if sign language is your first language and it may not be written English, they can send in feedback in the most accessible way for them, as opposed to having to kind of adapt, or maybe just it's going to take that extra bit of time, so they don't want to fill in that form in written English. It just reduces that additional barrier to sending in their thoughts. But also just, yeah, add questions like, how did the accessibility of the event impact your likelihood of attending events in the future? How did accessibility of the event impact your view on the company? Does it make you more likely, want to apply for a job? Has it changed your thoughts around the company? So just adding simple questions like that, I think, can make a really big difference.
Yeah, absolutely, Keely. And I think too, you can look at, the success metrics from an event before you implemented accessibility and then after, and look at, the percentage of event attendees who converted to applicants to your jobs, or the percentage of people who visited your event page and then actually, signed up or attended. And, you might be able to kind of attribute some of that stuff to accessibility. More people were able to access the event page, more people were able to access the event. So my last question is for Andrea. So like we kind of mentioned, we often hear from folks that they are really excited to implement these things, but they struggle to get buy-in from their team, buy-in from higher ups. How would you advise talent acquisition professionals to approach stakeholders on their team to get buy-in for implementing greater accessibility for recruiting events and beyond?
I would say the first thing for talent acquisition professionals is that you are generally in the profession of selling. You're selling an employer, you're selling a career path, you're selling a specific role, a job. And so to me, it should be quite natural to be able to make a business case, regardless of the level that you're at. You can also, if you are at a lower level in the TA team, you have a lot of control over your recruiting desk. So you're able to sort of follow some practices that get you some momentum, and then you can use that to build your business case. So specifically related to doing an event, I would just trust your abilities and expertise as a TA professional. I would certainly define the benefits. You've heard a lot of information already today, but again, do your research, educate yourself. Speak to the business needs, speak to the value of finding and recruiting. So sourcing and recruiting the untapped sort of labor that's out there, the talent that's out there. I think storytelling is really powerful, regardless of whether you're trying to get support for an event or build out your strategy. Storytelling is always the hook. It's always, what is the business problem that you're solving for? I would suggest maybe what's the right word? I wouldn't say manipulate, but I would definitely take advantage if there is a story, an executive or someone with influence who you may know has someone in their life who has accessibility needs. Once you know those stories, you can create a personal message to them so that they can become an advocate and a supporter. If you have your own story, then it's a lot easier to share your own stories and to say, here's what a difference this makes. Here are some other stories. Here are some competitors that might be doing certain things with regard to accessibility. So sometimes you can take the approach of we need to remain competitive. This is something that our customers care about. This is something that, depending on obviously your profile and what your organization does, but it speaks to not only who your customer base is, but also to overall staying competitive with the right talent that's out in the market. So I feel so many ways to get buy-in that don't include, I must get the executive team to listen to me make a presentation about why it's important. I think you can find multiple avenues. You can start making inroads, getting a few wins, doing some education, and then you sort of can build a little momentum. But then again, sometimes if you are the decision maker, you just do it. You build it into your strategy, you share it with your team, you get buy-in from your team, and then you start educating and you start kind of just keep pushing. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it. But I really think that please don't overestimate. This is easy. You can have quick wins, easy lifts. You had heard all those no cost and low cost alternatives, especially for events. The same goes for your just everyday practices.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Andrea. Yeah, just getting started and then that builds the stories and the business case for you. So, amazing. Well, thank y'all so much. We're gonna open up the floor to questions.
There were some things in the chat. I wasn't sure if we wanted to address those.
Yeah, I'm having a look now. Awesome. We've got some folks in people culture, career development. Christine says the most important thing is having disability representation at the table in planning and decision phases and throughout the event to impact decision making. Absolutely. And we have Making Space has a marketplace of experts. So companies are looking to, invest in education. They can hire, disabled consultants to come in and do that education, that first step that kind of, Andrew was talking about. So
There was a comment from Paul as well that I thought was a good point that maybe can be addressed, and I think builds on Amy's comment around kind of no cost and then kind of the more costly access requirements like having interpreters. And Paul mentioned, accommodations aren't expensive unless you require an interpreter. So companies need to be educated more on that part. Amy, Andrea, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that comment.
Absolutely. Thank you for that comment as well. And so one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that American Sign Language is a completely different language from the English language. It's got its own grammar, its own syntax. So there's been times when someone requested a sign language interpreter and then the team said, well, we'll have captioning in there. And so we'll use that. And so essentially you're asking someone to rely on high-speed captions in a second language. So it's not going to be a good experience. And, interpreters are not that expensive. It depends on how long you are scheduling them for an hour or 2 hours. It is affordable to be able to do that. And so I think to your point, there is a lot of educating that we need to do around the cost of the interpreter and why we need to provide that. And also don't provide one if someone doesn't need it, like myself. And I had another point that I was going to make about it. Oh, and then also making sure that your interpreters are well prepared ahead of time. If you are providing an event that's going to be using a lot of technical language or names, making sure that you're providing them with as much information ahead of time so that they can prepare. I've seen sign language interpreters at concerts, and they will provide them the lyrics to all the songs ahead of time so that they can learn the lyrics and then prepare ahead of time. So this is really, really important. Also for captioners as well, if you're using technical language and jargon and acronyms and all of that. So absolutely support making sure that we're meeting people where they are. Because if you are able to hire people with disabilities, you are going to have a huge win. People with disabilities are scrappy. They have been told no multiple times in their life, and you are missing out on a huge untapped pool of skilled talent. And so this is when you can meet them where they are and make that recruiting event accessible, you're going to help land some really amazing talent for your company.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. We've got some more questions in the chat. So Rebecca said, can you talk about any best practices slash considerations you have during longer events to balance content and participation and participant needs for breaks? Is there any research you reference when developing these best practices? I'll open that question up to the group.
Absolutely. I totally support scheduling breaks into every event that you have. Not only is it good for people that are neurodiverse and maybe might be overwhelmed, but this is good for parents who need to take a break and call their kids while they're at an event all day. Or this is good for people that need to take medicine. Or someone who's deaf. I live with auditory exhaustion. After being at an event all day, I'm trying to listen and process information. So breaks aren't just for one person, it is for so many people. Or if someone needs to eat something and their blood sugar is low. So absolutely, there is a lot of research around best practices for making sure that breaks are scheduled throughout the day and making sure that your moderator is intentional about that. If you need to step out or if you need to take a break or if you need to go somewhere, please do. We don't expect you to be here the entire time. Please make sure that you are protecting yourself and your mental health. That comes first. So there's absolutely research that supports this.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of instead of viewing it as like content versus break, viewing the break as enriching the content because then people will be able to focus better. Um, Keely or Andrea, any thoughts on that one?
No, I think Amy nailed it.
Awesome. We have a question from Taryn. So Taryn says, I love this suggestion of using KPIs to track success and create buy-in. What are some examples of accessibility KPIs? That's a great question. Keely or Andrea, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm happy to answer in general with regard to recruiting. If we're talking specifically for an event, it's sort of similar. Um, but what is the traction you're getting before or after you implement something? In the example of doing an event and you're getting an RSVP in advance for attendance or a sign up, asking for accessibility requirements of those who identify as having an accessibility need, how many of them actually attend? And then, as Keely mentioned, if you're doing post surveys, how was your experience? You can rate it. You can do kind of an NPS style question. I think that you've got to ask a lot of times to measure the overall satisfaction and the engagement that you're getting in order to improve. For me, as far as just general recruiting statistics or KPIs, being able to source where you're getting that talent from. So if it is through some sort of a platform or accessibility partner similar to Making Space, that's very helpful. If it's based on a certain place that you're advertising a role or a job in a certain format, tracking the feedback or sort of the traction you're getting as a result of that. You can build all of those into your funnel dashboards or your workflows. It's as long as you're tracking it in some way up front, it should flow right into all of your other data and metrics in your scorecards, dashboards, whatever you've got. And then for me, it's just a matter of tracking over time. And you just probably have to be patient. And then you have to wait for some traction and then you tweak and adjust, get feedback, do the same thing over and over. There's other ways I would say to measure the overall strategy, which is just awareness within your organization. You can do just sort of random sampling of people. Are you aware that we have an initiative around accessibility and ensuring that we have an inclusive environment for those with disabilities that are either seen or unseen? There's a lot of different ways you can start to track whether or not you're getting the attention that you want from your strategy, not just by hiring folks that actually identify as having a disability.
Yeah, and I think those were great, like, some kind of quantitative metrics. And I think there's also some good, like, qualitative metrics that you can look at. For example, like after our events, we always host a post-mortem and we discuss like what were things that worked accessibility wise and what were things that didn't. And we look at like, comments we had from people who like came up to us at the event or through the support email or things like that. So like, for example, from our Disability Pride Month, we got a lot of, we got some feedback at the actual event. Folks came up to us and told us that, there weren't enough clear pathways to navigate through the event. And that's kind of why I talked about balancing, chairs being within the conversation, but also there being paths. And that's something we learned from our first event. So we were able to kind of collect that qualitative data from that feedback and discuss how we could do it better. And we did it better the next time for our ending event with the roundtables. So balancing the numbers with the stories.